Hi, it's really hot outside, and I hear thunder in the distance and see dark clouds coming. So I won't have to water today, so I thought I would shoot a video to show kind of what I've been growing, some of the mistakes that I've made, some of my successes, and also to kind of show what this heat and lack of rain has been doing, and what I've been struggling against. I'll start out with the outlying plants and then we'll go to the garden. This is chamomile that is in a shady spot. Chamomile likes cooler weather, and I've been watering it, but you can see that it's sort of dying a little bit. Maybe it will bounce back, I don't know. We'll see, but it's moist, so I can only hope. Over here is peppermint. You can see the peppermint there doing well in the shade. It attracts a lot of pollinators that fly around it, so I'm hoping that they will then head to the garden. This is a citronella plant, which the folklore is that it repels mosquitoes, but I sit here on the porch and I get bitten by mosquitoes all the time, so I don't think it repels mosquitoes at all. It just smells like citronella, and it's doing really well. This is the third citronella plant that I've bought in the last 15 years, and the one that I have managed to keep alive for this long, so that's going well. These are, you can see here, these are flowers that I planted that I again planted more of a cool weather crop. These are either nasturtiums or impatiens. I can't remember which. They're doing okay, very slow growing. This is more flowers that are also doing okay. It took them quite a long time to come up, and they are hanging in there. This is my Meyer lemon tree, which is doing really great. I planted it in this 25-gallon pot, and that's the pot that it will stay in for its life, and I'll bring it in the winter. It has new growth on it. It's doing really well. Nice dark green leaves. This is my daughter's Venus flytrap, which again, happily, I've kept alive. Rosemary here, which I got as a gift, and I'm keeping it here to keep an eye on it because there are no holes in the bottom of the planter, so I have to be sure not to overwater it in the garden. These really sick little succulents you see here are suffering from transplant shock. I pulled about 14 different suckers out of some aloe vera plants, and I planted them. They'll come back, but right now they're sort of suffering, and the succulent in the back there is my daughter's succulent that she picked out. This is my planting table, working on things. It's a bit dirty. Lots of pepper plants that still need a home, and I need to get those in the ground somewhere or in a pot, but I don't have any space right now, so I have to figure out something to do with that. And one tiny little tomato plant that I will get in the ground. This over here is aloe vera. These huge aloe vera plants. Oh, there's my mulch. These huge aloe vera plants all came from this one right here in the middle, which has a nice little story. My mom got an aloe vera plant in 1980 in Mexico and brought it back, and then about 15 years ago she gave me this cutting as a tiny little shoot, and I planted it in that pot. And then all of the rest of the aloe vera you see here, including all the little aloe vera in pots, all came from that one I still have more suckers here that I need to pull out and replant. They go through some transplant shock. They really don't like the full sun of Texas, so I have them in the shade. But these are starting to come back, and I just need to give them a few weeks, and they will be as good as new. I have found almost impossible to kill an aloe vera. Over here are more plants that I have planted. These are tomatillos and marigolds that will eventually come out of the little planter and go in the ground. Some fennel that I planted out of season, which isn't doing so well, and some spearmint, which is very tiny, but you can see it in there growing. This is my herb wall with a pepper plant that I've put in the top to see how that works. Some thyme, Italian parsley, Greek oregano, and then another little aloe vera plant down there at the bottom that is actually doing really well. This is catnip that I planted here. It's doing great and taking off. Anything that might possibly be a perennial, I try to keep out of my raised beds. So that's why it's over here, and it's in the shade because they really don't like, at least Texas, full sun. Anytime anything says full sun in Texas, I found they don't mean full sun in Texas necessarily. This is my volunteer pumpkin patch from a pumpkin that we set out after Halloween for my resident possum that lives, I'll show you where the resident possum lives. He lives right under there, under my shed. And I planted, well, I didn't plant, but gave the pumpkin to him. He didn't eat it, and so it kind of rotted on the ground there over the winter. And then about 9 pumpkin plants sprouted up, and that's what you see here. Out here is my fig tree and my beautiful Vitex tree with all of its blooms doing well. I haven't done a thing to it, no water or anything. It's just doing great on its own. But this is the fig tree, which had a little bit of sickness. You can see here on the leaves, but it's doing well and recovering from that. It's got new growth, new little baby figs coming out on it. You can see there, and it's doing really well. Nice big yard. I can show you the rose bushes. It's been so hot, I put some water out for what I thought the squirrels would drink, but it wound up becoming a bird bath, which is fine. But squirrels apparently are picky and don't want to drink bird water. Just turning off my soaker hose and going over here to the roses. Here are my rose bushes. This one is probably still going through a little transplant shock. The curled leaves are a lack of water and heat. This plant was already here. I believe it's a boxwood. And then this is my other rose bush, which is in the process of losing its current roses, and hopefully more roses will come back on it. And here we are to the garden. Should we start with the pots? We'll start with the outlier here. These are morning glories that I transplanted. I had them in another place, and they weren't doing very well because they weren't getting enough sun. So I moved them over here, and we'll see if they take off. Something has been trying to get at it there. And then I planted marigolds in the front. So I'm hoping that that will go well. These are spearmint. I have them in pots because if you know anything about mint, it spreads like crazy. And I don't want these to spread into my garden, so I put them in pots. And I've already used some to make tea, and it tastes really great. The heat is getting to them a little bit, but not too bad. This is called an Angelonia. It's a perennial flower. I bought it to attract pollinators. It suffered a little heat damage here, but it seems to be doing well and taking off. These are Dallas Red Lantanas, and this will spread out between 3 and 5 feet when it reaches maturity. So, and also a perennial, so I have it in a pot as a pollinator attractor. This is mammoth leaf basil, and it's huge. The mammoth leaves are bigger and more mild than sweet basil. Depending on how big they get, sometimes you can use them as wraps for different things. So I'm looking forward to using those. Blackberry bush here. I'm waiting on my trellis, which should arrive today or tomorrow, and then I can start building that and putting those in the ground. This is thyme that I grew from seed, and the fabric pots really lose water very quickly. It's almost impossible to kill thyme, fortunately, so it's growing well in this pot, and I'm trying to keep it hydrated with a plate underneath it that I fill with water, and then it soaks up. This is some lemon thyme that I bought at about half of this size, and it's doing very well, as you can see, and I've used that quite a lot. This is Champanelle grapes, which I will put on a big trellis that'll be out in the middle of the yard in the sunny area there. I have about a 9-foot trellis coming, a 9-foot long trellis. Bay laurel tree. These are really slow growing trees that I ordered from California. They only grow about a foot a year. And so they will also live in these pots because bay laurel might not be able to survive the winter here in the ground if it gets very cold. This is comfrey that I bought. Comfrey is used as an herb. It's used medicinally in some cultures. And then organic gardeners also take comfrey and make a fertilizing tea out of it because it's really nitrogen rich. And it apparently spreads like crazy, so that's why it's in a pot as well. Coleus to attract pollinators. This is a shade loving plant. So far it's doing okay out here, but I put it in the pot so I can move it around if I need to. This is my first successful attempt at growing rosemary and keeping it alive. For some reason, in the past, every time I've grown rosemary, it's died. I think maybe from overwatering. I do have a problem overwatering sometimes to combat the heat. This is lemon verbena, which is used for cooking, but also in drinks and cocktails. It makes lovely cocktails. It makes lovely teas. More Dallas Red Lantana there with really pretty flowers on it. These are pepper plants that needed a home, and I'm trying to grow them here in these fabric pots, and we'll see how they do. Chives, which something has been poking around in, but these are chives that will also spread like wildfire. So I have those in pots, and they'll spread through their seeds. So I just have to be sure to keep the seeds, to keep them trimmed so they don't grow seeds and spread. We'll start with this bed. This is my original bed. It's 4 feet wide by 12 feet long. And then it's actually 3 separate beds. And then I put them all together really closely, and I also planted in the negative space in between the beds to briefly go through what all's in here. It's kind of a mixture in planting philosophy between square foot gardening, no-dig gardening as practiced by Charles Dowding, and also permaculture and the idea of planting as much biodiversity as possible for pest control, which I have to say has been working really well. I really don't have a huge problem with pests, and I'm not using anything. At first I was using a lot of diatomaceous earth on the soil when things were getting going, when they were young, and I haven't had to use any in about 3 weeks or so. And I'm not having a problem with anything other than the occasional cricket that will come and have a feast, and sometimes birds digging, but you can't really do anything about that unless you net everything, which I'm not going to do. So I planted sunflowers in many of the corners of my garden to act as shade when it gets to be July and August and it's horribly hot. Hopefully the sunflowers will provide a shade for some of the plants, and also to harvest sunflower seeds. So these are mammoth sunflowers that will grow to be possibly up to 10 feet tall. These are watermelon plants here that I have growing up this trellis. They're doing really well. This watermelon plant continues to try to attach itself to that pepper plant. The pepper plant doesn't like it very much, so we'll see how it does. These are parsnips here, carrots here. The carrots are finally taking off. I planted them in March, and they're finally taking off. More carrots, a different type of carrot. These are turnips. It's a little too hot to plant turnips for the bulbs, for the root. And so if they don't produce a root, you can always use them for greens, and these greens are looking really great. You can see like nothing is really eating them. They're doing really well. A pepper plant here, a petunia to attract pollinators. These are tomato plants that I planted too close together and I didn't have the heart to thin them out because they were doing so well, so I had to develop some sort of system to hold them all together. And they're producing well, they're growing well, and they have some tomatoes on them, so I'm happy with that. This is another pepper plant here. It has blooms on it. We'll see if it produces. I haven't had any peppers actually produce and stay on the vine yet. So I'm hoping that that one takes off and does well. These are all beans in the back. You can see some of them have beans on them. You can see beans down there. And these are all different types of beans, so not the same. Most of these are bush beans. I have bush and pole beans. Unfortunately, I planted them all sort of together without thinking about it. So I had to develop some ideas to trellis the pole beans that would also not impede the bush beans at all. You can see they have some beans on them. And this here is a marigold that I believe was a stray seed that got planted there along with a bean, and I'm letting it grow to see what happens. That is, I believe that's a pole bean behind it, so maybe it'll grow a little bit up the marigold. We'll see. Over here I have dill that I'm growing out of season, but it's shaded, and so it's doing okay. You can see that. Dill will spread if you let it seed, but I don't intend to let this one seed. I have some other dill that I'm growing in a pot, and maybe I'll let that go to seed. This is another sunflower here. Look at how big these marigolds are. They're like 2 feet tall and still growing. They haven't produced their flowers yet, but they will. A couple of little ants on them. I have lots of ants. This is thyme that I have planted in the garden to see how it does. And little beets. You can see the little beets right here. And then more beans here that I have trellised up. There's a bee flying around me. More beans, again, making the mistake, don't make that mistake, of planting bush beans and pole beans all together. That was silly. So you can see this is a pole bean that's climbing here. Some of these others are bush beans, and they all have beans on them. This was a tomato plant that I grew from a sucker that I cut off of another plant, and I staked it and grew it, and now it's doing really well and it's taking off and growing. This is a different type of tomato plant that I bought as a little seedling, and it's doing really well. It has tomatoes on it, you can see. I'm just noticing all of these ants. I don't know where they're coming from. I'll have to put some borax and sugar water out, take care of them. This is another sunflower. This sunflower broke off in a storm, in a windstorm that we had. I staked it, tied it up, and it's doing great, and it's surviving, and it's taking off again. So I'm really happy about that. You can see corn here, and big corn plants here. We'll see if I get corn production. I don't know if I will or not. This corn over here has produced the part that will make the cob. We'll see if it gets pollinated. You can see it there. I've had to tie them up because they too got knocked over in the windstorm. So I tied them up and they seem to be doing okay. These are all radishes. All of these are radishes that I've been harvesting as they get ready. These are French breakfast radishes. And then I have beets here in the middle. The beets are growing a bit out of season, but they're shaded, so we'll see what happens. And then these are cherry bell radishes here. And they are getting too hot and going to seed. You can see this one is going to seed. So I'll have to pull some of those out and eat them. Pepper plants that I planted to try to find them a home. I overplanted peppers for sure. There's a little volunteer radish right down there. These onions I planted back in March and they never took off. And I'm not sure why. They have never grown past this stage here. So I'll have to figure out what to do about that. Here's more corn, another sunflower. These are cucumbers that I have growing up this trellis. They're producing cucumbers. You can see there's a little cucumber right there. I've pulled several cucumbers off of here already. I'm saving them to pickle. These are pickling cucumbers. And they're doing really well on the trellis. Sometimes you have to kind of train them to grow into the trellis. This is not cucumber, actually. This is squash. I believe this is, ooh, sharp, prickly. This is a type of winter squash, I believe. I made the mistake when I planted these, since it was my first bed. I learned lots of lessons. And I just wrote squash on the tab and not what kind of squash it was. So it's kind of like a surprise whenever anything comes up. But you can see this is a female flower here because it has the little bulge. And then the male flowers are the ones without the bulge, like that one. And so then hopefully the pollinators go from one to the other and fertilize the female flower, and then you get squash. This is garlic in here. You can see all of that garlic growing. Again, it's growing out of season, but we'll see what happens. This okra took forever to take off, but it's now taking off. I only planted a couple of okra plants because I've learned my lesson in growing okra. You really only want 1 or 2 plants because okra is so prolific. This is another pepper plant here, right here. There's basil that's growing really well. And my goodness, more ants. The ants drive me crazy. Ants don't really disturb your plants, so it's not like they're going to kill the plants, but the problem with ants is they have a symbiotic relationship with aphids. And so if you have ants, you might get aphids, and you don't want aphids. So you have to take care of your ant problem. And these weren't here yesterday, so they're swarming for some reason, and I'll have to take care of that. Let's see, another okra plant here. Cucumbers. All these cucumbers growing really well up the trellis, doing what they should be doing. And sometimes you can sort of mess around with it to the point that it will latch on by itself. Other times you have to kind of poke it through. But these little hands that it has are really great at grabbing. I can't really do it with a phone, so I'll have to come back and do that later. These tomatoes, I don't know what kind they are. They might be beefsteak, they might be Rutgers, they might be cherry tomatoes, because, again, I forgot to write down what kind they were. I probably planted them too close together, but they don't seem to care. You can see how I'm standing up straight. You can see how tall they are. They're producing like crazy. I pruned a little bit in the beginning of the growing season, and now they're just sort of growing and doing their thing. They're loaded with tomatoes all over the place, you can see. And once they start to turn red, even a slight blush, I'll pull them off because I have so many birds that they will make a feast of those. This is zucchini. I've had one zucchini. There's a yellow squash in there as well. And it has produced once. And I saw a yellow squash bulb on there yesterday. So it looks like it's going to produce again. You can see it right there. If you look closely, right there. And then everything is growing up the trellis really well. The zucchini doesn't really grow up the trellis. It's kind of growing out the side. It's not a climber unless you tie it up. I had it tied up and it was a little too much. And so I untied it and I'm sort of letting it creep out. And we'll see how that goes. This is another squash plant here that's growing up and over the trellis, doing what it should be doing. There's a stray marigold seed right here. Probably won't do very well for a while because they like full sun, and it's definitely not getting full sun there. This is cilantro that I planted out of season. It's too hot for cilantro. It should be completely dead, but it's here in a shady spot, so it's growing really well, actually. These are more squash here. These haven't produced yet. It took them a while to take off. They have some dead spots that I need to prune off and take care of. You're also getting the first look at the garden of the day before I clean it up. This is my second bed. I planted it in April. It's the same size, 4x12. A different type of bed. These fancy plastic beds are easy to put together. It's a plastic that doesn't leach. But I'm not going to do these again because I like the wood raised beds better. And the wood beds are more environmentally friendly. Anyway, this bed is mostly peppers, tomatillos, and daikon radish. So, and sunflower. Peppers here. The little short plants you see here are zinnias, which is a cut and come again flower that likes the heat. Something has been digging in the bed, probably birds. Tomatillos don't need to be caged. You can cage them, but you can also just stake them. They get a little leggy, so I've staked these tomatillos. They take a long time to fruit and come to maturity, about 100 days. So, but I planted these from seed, so they're growing pretty well. Daikon radish. Boy, something has really been digging in here. Tomatillos, peppers, more, this is sunflower here. These are zinnias, which are doing pretty well. More peppers. Some crickets got to my peppers as well. So a couple of weeks ago, so some of them kind of struggled through that. This is peppers and yellow pear tomatoes, so it's kind of like a small tomato. And all of these plants have already produced tomatoes, and I've taken them off. So this is the second round of production that's on here now. You can see there's a tomato there. There's some around on the other side that are growing. These pepper plants are, again, not growing really quickly. I think I had a nitrogen problem for a while. I've corrected that with more compost and also putting a week fertilizer on them every week. The zinnias are very small here. I'm hoping they'll take off. Part of the problem with this bed is it's a little too shady. It's a little too shady for peppers, so we will see how that goes. This bed here has lots of different things in it. Sunflowers, purple basil that's growing really well. I do have to come out here and make sure it's not going to seed. It's a little hot for purple basil. All of these are cantaloupe, and they will eventually climb up this trellis if they will grow faster. This is Thai basil, sweet basil, more tiny little pepper plants, an okra plant. This is parsley, curly parsley that I'm growing out of season. So far so good. If it gets into the hundreds, it will kill it, but I wanted to see how it would do since this bed is shady. There's basil there, another sunflower right there. Daikon radish here. I planted a lot of daikon because daikon is heat resistant, and it won't split and go to seed like other radishes. And also, you can't get daikon radish in commerce, and I like kimchi, and so you also can't get kimchi in commerce, so you kind of have to either go to Dallas to buy it or grow your own. This is mustard that I'm growing out of season, but so far so good. It's had a little bit of cricket damage, but it's all right. Those are petunias, peppers, more cantaloupe. I'm not sure why I planted the cantaloupe here because there's really nowhere for it to go, but we'll see how it does. These are more peppers. I will know next time not to plant peppers in a shady bed because they are just growing so slowly. They're okay. You can see new growth. My nitrogen problem's getting better, but they're just not getting enough sun to really take off, not like the peppers in the other bed. Over here, my last bed, I don't anticipate putting in any more beds this season, maybe next season, but I made all these are all 4x4 beds put together to be 4x12. I like the wood beds. They're more environmentally friendly. This is not treated wood, it's untreated. They were simple and they were cheap, super cheap. This whole bed here cost less than $50, including the screws. Also, you can sit on the side of a wood bed and you cannot sit on the side of a plastic bed, which is handy when you're working. This bed also has a bit of a shade problem, but so far it hasn't mattered too much. These are zinnias that I've planted here around the edge. When you plant flowers in your garden, it attracts pollinators, and also it throws off the bad insects. When you plant more than one thing in a bed. All the other plants in here are sweet potatoes. Sweet potatoes that I bought at the store. They got eyes in them. I cut them up, put them into water. They grew slips, which are the leafy parts, and then I planted them, and there they are. And they're growing, and they're taking off. And so hopefully this will be a whole big bed of sweet potatoes. I have one here that didn't really come up. I'm still waiting on it. If it doesn't come up in this area, then I'll plant something else there. This is cinnamon basil. It smells really nice, tastes really good. These are bush beans. I learned my lesson. So these are painted pony beans. These are, I have to look at my label, navy beans. Growing them a little bit out of season, but we'll see how they do. And these are cowpeas or black-eyed peas. You can see Cricket got to that one and ate everything, but I still have 3 left there. These are all basil that I've planted. Basil is a good deterrent for insects. They don't like the smell, and so they stay away. This is Malabar spinach. It's not a true spinach. It's an Asian climbing vine that produces spinach flavored leaves. And the reason why I planted it, because you would normally never plant spinach this late in the season. It would die a horrible death. But Malabar spinach likes heat and humidity, and it can survive in temperatures over 100 degrees. And so far, it's doing really well. It sprouted yesterday, and you can see that it's growing very well. These are cucumbers, these are zucchinis that I've planted in the middle. So I have these trellises here that I've built, and the Malabar spinach and the pole beans will grow up the poles, and then the zucchini will provide ground cover to try to keep weeds down and keep the soil moist. So there is a method to the madness, maybe a little, and we'll see how it goes. The zucchini aren't taking off as fast as they did in the other bed. It might be because of the shade. This is a fast-growing pole green bean. This grew really fast. It came up last week, and you can see that it's already huge. Over here, I had to replant some cowpeas, black-eyed peas, because I think I had too much compost, believe it or not, and they weren't sprouting. So I put some more earth in, some more soil in there, and now suddenly they are coming up. So you can see there's one coming up there. These are all little basil plants that are doing fine. This is asparagus bean. It's a pole bean that grows beans that can be up to 2 or 3 feet long. I think I read at least a foot. So, and it's supposed to be a really prolific producer, so I'm anxious to see how that goes. These are petunias. This is a Phoenix tomato plant. So Phoenix tomatoes are something that I learned about from watching one of my gardening channels from Australia. Phoenix tomatoes can survive really hot temperatures and continue to put fruit on. And so we'll see how it does this summer. If you notice, it has some bird poop on it right there, because there's a bird nest in the tree right above this. And so most of the time it gets on the soil, sometimes it gets on the plants, but you know, bird poop is guano and it's a fertilizer, so that works out. This is sage. It's growing really well. These are super sweet hybrid 100 tomatoes that I grew from seed. They're doing well. I planted them just a few days ago after starting them from seedlings, and they're taking off. They are actually a vining tomato, and they're supposed to be a really prolific producer. They're one of the only hybrid plants I have in the bed. Most everything else is an heirloom. But these don't produce viable seeds that you can grow from next season. This is dill that I'm growing in a clump just for the little tender shoots. I'm not growing it for seed or anything like that, which is how you grow dill if you want to just harvest it when it's young. You can't see anything here, but yesterday I planted sunflowers here in a row, so maybe more sunflowers will come up. These are all tomatillos that I grew from seed and didn't have anywhere else to put them, So I put them there. And then this is some lemongrass that I bought. And I bought it, it's grown since I bought it. It's grown maybe 2 inches or so. And I bought it about a week and a half ago and planted it. It's doing really well. I planted some Blue Lake bush beans here, which haven't come up yet because I planted them yesterday. And those will be bush beans, green beans. And then here I planted a couple of seeds right here of cucuzzi squash, which grows a squash that's kind of a cross between a cucumber and a zucchini. It was a seed pack that I bought for 99 cents online. It sounded cool. I wanted to try it. So that's an experiment. And I don't know what I'll plant here in the middle. You can see that it's sectioned off in 12-inch squares for square foot gardening. And I haven't decided what exactly to plant there. It needs to be something that will grow in the shade, but also can stand the heat. So that is to be determined.